This is Macro Analytics, delivering frank conversations on global macroeconomics and market analysis, outside the mainstream, featuring discussions and debates between Gordon T. Long, publisher and editor of GordonTLong.com, and his guests. The content of this discussion is strictly the opinion of the participants. It is in no way a solicitation for business, nor is it to be considered investment advice of any sort. Always consult a registered investment advisor before making any investment decision. These discussions are extremely hard-hitting and terribly frank, and parental discretion is advised. Now, on to the show.
Good morning. I'm Gord Long with GordonTLong.com, and I have with me this morning Charles Hugh Smith, well-recognized writer on the web, who is the publisher of the website of2minds.com. Welcome back, Charles. We missed a couple months.
It went by very quick.
and I hope you had a good summer.
Yeah, very busy, as I know you did too. But it's good to be back in the saddle and on to new analysis.
I really wanted to revisit something we spent a fair bit of time on last year and the year before about crony capitalism or corporatocracy, because I've noticed that you've been doing some writings on revisiting it, and you made a couple things that you put out I thought was really interesting. This chart I have up right now is the chart that you and I spent a lot of time on, and how the evolution, when you have imbalances, leads to central planning and consolidation, and what will come out of it. And we use the word crony capitalism, financial repression, and statism, and why it is. Now, I'll refer our listeners to Macro Analytics Library on shows that we did on why that evolution would happen. But, crony capitalism can be used with corporatism. We don't use this word fascism. You can't use that in polite conversation to describe what's going on in America. No, you're going to be asked to leave. But, Mussolini, who coined the whole process, defined it this way. And it's this marriage, and that's what we have in America. Make no doubt about it. And that is, I'll use the polite form of crony capitalism, that relationship between governments and corporations that aren't necessarily in the benefits of we the people. I wanted to get your views this morning on why classical capitalism has in fact devolved to crony capitalism. And again, make no doubt about it for our listeners that it's happening. When a government changes, the amount of political appointments, we hear about it at the secretary level, right? The cabinet. But below those, there's assistant secretaries, subsecretaries. There's literally thousands of appointments. Now, why would somebody want to give up their job for 4 years or more? And do they have a job to go back to? Well, when you look at them, you can start to see where they came from and where they go back to. Now, is there a quid pro quo in there? I'm sure they're all doing it just for the best of us, we the taxpayer. But there's begs the question, there may be some that aren't quite that way or altruistic. In corporations, now I just pick on two here who have vested interest in corporate governments and regulations and regulatories. I mean, the lists are endless, and very senior people. By industry, I picked two industries here as example. I'd really like to show one, if I could find one, of what's going on with the securities and surveillance complex, which I think is now astoundingly large, with like 3,600 companies feeding the U.S. government. So it's happening. It's happening in a big way. Why? Why does it happen from the corporations, but individuals? Because we're showing a lot of individuals here. What's going on? And you had a quote from Kenneth Galbraith that I thought was really telling.
And it basically speaks to the pursuit of self-interest. And, that's well and good at small scale capitalism, when we're just pursuing our own self-interest. The consequences of us pursuing our own personal self-interest are relatively modest. But when you're in a position of power, then the pursuit of your self-interest, the exclusion of everything else, leads to systemic instability and the distortions that you've covered many times. And we'll just read the quote real quickly. People of privilege will always risk their complete destruction rather than surrender any material part of their advantage.
John Kenneth Galbraith, when he wrote The Age of Uncertainty, how long ago was that? I was a young man when I read it. So we're going back to the 60s. Nothing new. And he was just coining at the time and goes, it's been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's a human condition. It's naturally human. It's why we overthrew kings and queens whence the republics, etc. Right?
Gordon, I think we can kind of jump from there that, you and I are both data-driven people. We like to look at charts. We like to look at statistics to try to understand the systems and why they're dysfunctional. But I think you're absolutely right. We have to go back and start with human nature. That, of course, we pursue our own self-interest, and that in and of itself is not destructive. But what happens is when we centralize power, then the people that access that power and control that power, then their self-interest trumps all of the rest of our self-interest. And another part of human nature is we're very short-term. I mean, our brains are wired to, find a fruit tree with fruit and then strip it and then move on. I mean, we're hunter-gatherers. That's how we're designed. And so we don't really have the mindset to look beyond and see what the consequences long-term will be of what we do to get by in the moment. And I've made a few points here. The second point is this short-term thinking. And you can see it, and we've discussed it in the past. Everybody's just kind of trying to get through the crisis, the downturn, the instability, and survive. And in other words, like the politicians want to get reelected, the policymakers want to get reappointed, the money managers don't want to be fired because they missed their numbers. And so what we see is one expediency after another in both the government and corporate management. And so the long-term consequences are piling up of the accumulation of deadwood as everybody rushes around to just kind of save their jobs and keep what they have.
All I can say is just drive around the Beltway in Washington. That's what you get a feeling. It's everybody's, if not making work, creating work, busy, but I'm sure they're doing fine jobs.
Right.
But my feeling is we have more people tripping over each other trying to make work. Those who don't get the privilege of going to Washington.
Right. My third point is that we're reaching the exhaustion stage of the consumption based on debt model.
I agree fully with that, Charles.
Yeah, and we've covered it before. Is that incomes have been stagnant basically since the late '60s, and the powers that be have enabled the rise of debt to fund consumption by lowering interest rates. And so the same income can leverage up a much higher amount of debt. But that end game, we've already reached that. People have exhausted the ability to borrow. And most people that are buying cars now and homes are not really qualified by prudent risk management standards. And so what that leads to is legitimate capital accumulation from making profits and from goods and services has become far more difficult. And so the return on investment of buying political favors is so much higher than taking the risks of investing in expanding plant and R&D. And so that's the driver of the crony capitalism fascism link between global corporations and central governments that you described.
Years ago, Charles, I was in engineering and manufacturing and designing products. And even then, and I'm going back over 20 years, 25 years, we had probably 80 to 85% of next year's revenue still on the design board. That meant if that product was late, or if you got the wrong product, or if you had problems with it, or you mispriced it, or the competition came out faster than you, or that the life cycle of the product was shorter than you anticipated, your profits could disappear in a blink. So you can imagine the pressure on engineering and management to get this right every single day, and the amount of capital that was going in to fund these development projects. Why today would you take that kind of risk? Especially with margins so tight. You're literally almost betting the company. Years and years ago, Carnegie and Rockefeller and these people bet huge amounts of money on massive risk and pulled it off and were very rich people. Well, people aren't taking that kind of risk today, and corporations are not. They're going for the easy way. The easy way is to do financial engineering different techniques, or do mergers and acquisitions accretively and load them up with debt on their balance sheet and strip out assets and consolidate the people on the top line, or use regulatory arbitrage from the government to give yourself a competitive advantage to lock out your competition or protect your margins. There's more money there, less risk, and that's what you're going to do. That's why crony capitalism comes into existence. It's good business. But is that the right business? Because, you were saying, Charles, well, consumption. We're a 71% consumption economy in the United States. 71%. And by the way, the government is consuming a bigger part of the other 29%. The rest of the countries in the world, China is like maybe 38%. They're all in the 30s. So it's, as you said, it's these low interest rates, et cetera, that have allowed us to consume vastly more than we should consume. Well, what's wrong with that? Well, what's wrong with that is in a capitalist system, savings is reapplied and reinvested to create wealth, and through good use of an investment. Wealth creates savings, and that's how you grow. Well, when consumption is 70%, there is no savings. It's taking away from savings. Therefore, there's no capital to be able to invest in. We think we have capital. We can borrow against it and create more debt. But when you've got this, it's too risky to do it. And there's a shortage of capital out there. You can see it, and you can see CapEx around the world is completely falling, even on small businesses right now. This is the destruction of your classical capitalism and the evolution of crony capitalism, in my mind, from what you're saying, Charles.
No, absolutely. That's a very good description of the process from classical capitalism and capital accumulation to what we have now. And my fifth point was that the Venn diagrams that you showed earlier of the revolving door between global corporations and the government agencies that oversee them, you can see that it's impossible to have political reform as a result of this marriage of global corporations and government. Because if you tried to impose some regulation on a corporation that was skimming money because of regulatory arbitrage, well, as your diagram shows, Joe Q. Citizen, who used to work for the financial industry and now is in the regulatory agency, he gets a call from his buddy, and he says, "Oh, okay, well, let's clear up this little difficulty." And so the regulation that would control the power pyramid is gutted, or it's tabled. And so this is the problem with this system is that reform, no matter how desperately needed, is politically impossible.
I don't think we should give the impression, that people that are in this world of the crony capitalists, the corporate, are bad people. They're good people, went to the best schools. They're trying to support their families. They're trying to support, their children going to college, etc. But the reality is this is the business incentives today put them in this position of getting their full leverage from the government without anybody questioning it from a bigger perspective, the damage it's doing. And, we need very high leadership to see it's wrong and make changes. And we don't have that. We don't even have a recognition of it. And there's no natural check and balance to correct this. That's the problem. There's no check and a balance to make it accelerate even faster. And that's when, our whole system has always been built with checks and balances to keep it pointed in the right direction. That's what's missing. There's no check and balance.
That's an excellent point, Gordon, and we can call that a feedback loop. And right. I think the same thing is happened in Japan for 25 years. They also don't have any checks and balances for their corporatocracy. And so what they've done is, and we're just a little bit behind them, they've used central bank monetary policy, the zero interest rates, the asset purchases, the cheap credit to banks, the quantitative easing. All of these things have papered over the dysfunction in the political and economic system, and by just basically flooding it with free money. And we've tried that now for almost 6 years. And I don't think it really fixes anything. And I think Japan is the case in point.
I put out a tape and it said the 12 ways that quantitative easing is destroying capitalism. And I'll leave it to our listeners to go through, and I lay out exactly why sustained, cheap money, bad money, forces out good money, and why mispricing of risk and lack of price discovery, the amount of malinvestment that will come out of it, and is in fact coming out of it. So that's what's happening. Because we have no correct check and balances, there are a couple in the system, and that is we have antitrust laws, monopoly laws that are on the books. When was the last time you saw a U.S. corporation broken up by antitrust laws because it was too large and had an unfair advantage? You haven't, right, Charles?
1946 or something?
Well, I think you have to go back to AT&T and when it broke them up into the R-Bucks, and when they were threatening to break up IBM, which they didn't do. We just don't. So we're not enforcing the law. The regulators are not breaking it out. We debate too big to fail. Why are we even debating that? They should have never been that large in the first place. So we're no longer exercising any kinds of, even what's on the books, to regulate to stop this system. Additionally, all of the policies now are monetary policies. That is through the central banks. So the central banks are not part of not part of the legislative branch. They're not part of the judicial branch. They're not part of the executive branch, are they, Charles?
No.
They're not elected officials, are they?
No.
They're appointed? Okay, and who do they answer to? Well, I've listened to enough Humphrey Hawkins in Washington twice a year to say they don't answer to the Senate, that's for sure. We've surrendered our country, and I'm not trying to pick on the central bankers. I'm sure Yellen and Bernanke are wonderful human beings. But just a minute now. Is that the right thing to really want to destroy our system?
You have a chart here, Gordon, that speaks right to that, the role of the central banks, that I think we should talk about, where you say from capitalism goes to creditism, which then mutates to cronyism.
Yeah, that's what I believe is happening here. Pre-dot-com, we were pretty well still living in a world of capitalism. But at the dot-com, we stopped. Savings is investment in the corporations, and therefore goes back into creating wealth. Well, with creditism, what you do is you're not creating savings, you create credit. And if you create credit, it gets you consumption. So consumption has replaced capitalism. So I call it creditism. But it starts with unsound money to create it. Well, but the crisis, the 2008 financial crisis, we mutated to something else, is to cronyism. Because government suddenly is becoming such a large part of the economy, and everything else is so risky, the discussion we talked about, it's better to feed off the government. And so that has become an accelerated fashion. Well, if we allow that to keep on going, it's going to mutate again to another level where, the relationship between corporations and government is going to be too strict. And it's not going to be for the benefit of the individual. It's going to be to finance the government and to make sure that the corporations themselves are sound. And remember why we want capitalism. When you have capitalism, you get more for less because of competition. It's healthy to have competition. It forces price discovery and you get the best price. When you take that out of the system, you end up with less for more. It costs you more, and you see it in the stores, you see it everywhere else. And then what happens if we go to the next level? You'll see shortages, black markets, all sorts of new things evolve, and then you'll get very, very little for a lot more. And that's the road we're on track for right now. And that's why we have to fight it. That's why we have to stop it. This is not the road we want to be on.
Right, Gordon, and we can look to Argentina and Venezuela, which also have state cartel, crony capitalism, and with socialist leanings, but it's really a variation on the same system. And look at what's happening there: the destruction of the currency, shortages, black market, exactly what you said. And I just my last comment is I want to mention here at your last point when you're talking about central planning. Let's not forget that the government just doesn't take the spending for government and social welfare. The central government controls higher education. It funds the entire, college, higher education sector. It's all of the defense industry is basically government run. All of healthcare is controlled by the government, with various regulations and so on. So when you look at when you add up all of those industries, you realize the government is the dominant force, as you so rightly say. It is the dominant force because it controls or influences or regulates virtually all the large sectors of the economy.
So where's the efficiency so that we'll get more for less? It isn't motivated that way.
No.
And so it feeds on itself to get larger. And the larger it gets, the government, the more the corporations are going to leverage themselves. And there's nothing in this that's going to correct it.
Yeah, that's an absolutely critical point, Gordon. There's no self-correcting mechanism.
There's no John Adams' invisible hand. And because we've tied it behind their back. So it's up to us, we the people, to say, no, this has got to be fixed. These are the changes. But it's pretty tough when everybody's starting to live off, 50 million people on food stamps and various social programs of the government to say, no, I want them stopped. And so as more and more people don't have jobs, the government, when it gets a certain size, literally will become socialist. I grew up in that environment. I saw how it can change, and I don't want to see it here in America. I can tell you that straight out. Charles, we went past our hard line as usual. Any closing comments you want to make on this subject? Just
that we're talking about deep, profound, structural, political, and economic dysfunction. And I think dysfunction leads to, crisis and collapse. And that's what we're discussing. And as you say, we have to fix it, and we have to fix it from the ground up.
Yeah, we're talking structural changes. Our problem is not monetary. It's a lack of fiscal and public policies and structural changes. Mervyn King was the governor of the Bank of England, one of the first ones that pushed quantitative easing. Well, he was just out saying quantitative easing in this country have went as far as they can go, in fact, are now destructive. What now needs to be done are structural redefinitions. This is the past Bank of England governor. We should listen to what he's saying, but we're not. And it's because of the points you just made, Charles, not just with government, cronyism, corporations, but the governments themselves and politicians. It's easier to kick the can down the road because these are tough problems, and we're in denial and we don't want to listen to them. And it's like medicine; it hurts. So what happens is it's inevitable. You have to have a crisis.
That's right.
And so politicians will wait for the crisis, and you can't really blame them. But because during the crisis, when the world kind of stops in that freeze, you'll accept almost anything to have stability. Things that you would absolutely vehemently not accept today. In that moment, you'll say, yeah, because we've got to get things back working. And that's when the big grab comes. And that's the frightening part that we've got to be very, very concerned about. Charles, we got a break. Always enjoyable fun talking to you. And we'll see you again next month.
Thank you, Gordon.
Thank you very much. Bye.
This has been Gordon T. Long, editor and publisher of GordonTLong.com. New recordings are posted regularly and can be found at GordonTLong.com. New show notifications are available through RSS feed, iTunes, and other social networking venues at GordonTLong.com.